Hi, I wanted to spend a few minutes and go over your self-portrait project for Adobe Illustrator to make sure everyone's clear and knows about anything from the parameters to actually the possibilities. So there's two key things. One is, what does this thing look like? How far can I go? And I hope you've downloaded and reviewed the examples, both our student examples and some things I found interesting and very doable from your point of view from the internet, and also the tech specs, some of the stuff you may not be used to reading, and it's pretty straightforward. Obviously, let's take a look at the tech specs real quick, and then I'll show you how to do some things in Illustrator. It says right here, 8.5 by 11, which is typical paper size, master Illustrator file. 7.5 by 10 trimmed. Why would I do that? Basically, I want to create what's called bleed, meaning that the document is actually slightly larger in its design so that when I print it out, knowing that I cannot print to the very edge of any type of paper, I basically just cut it down. Get a ruler and a razor knife and trim it. This is super typical of any type of magazine ads that have photography or type of artwork that goes past the edge. The stuff is all overprinted, so the document has what's called bleed, and then it's cut down to size. Your finished document would look like this, and this would be pulled out from Illustrator. And I wind up with some registration marks, and these marks here, these hash marks, are set to be 1/2 inch inside each corner. So I can put my ruler going across here and just cut off the pieces I don't need. Now you'll have to deal with this, what you want cut off, what you don't want cut off. You won't need to worry about personally the color calibrations and also the registration to keep this stuff lined up in a larger commercial printing press. But these crop marks, was what these are called, are highly, highly useful to be able to overprint a document using bleed in the original design and then trim it to fit. This way you don't wind up with a cutting into your document that 1/8 of an inch to try to make sure you don't have any white in the area here. Now you may have some white on the sides. We don't know. This is your design, but this is typically how this is done. This is fundamentally, I think, a little bit easier to do in Adobe InDesign, which we'll be getting to shortly. But how do you do this in Adobe Illustrator? Pretty straightforward. Let's pop into Illustrator here. If I can get over to here, I'll actually do File, New. All right, it's going to ask me some questions here. I want to set up the document to be 7.5 by 10. That's my final size, and allow bleed all the way around 1/2 inch. This little thing, it looks like a little tick or some kind of bug, is actually a chained together thing. So I can type this in as in, 0.5 or 1/2 an inch. I'm working in inches. Here, my units, orientation is portrait, if that's what you want to be doing, and CMYK 300 DPI, obviously. So this will now total 8.5 by 11, and I can then overprint this, print it out, and then cut it down to size. Pretty straightforward. A lot of ways to do this, but your finished piece should be this, your document that you send out to me, and also take a quick snapshot, say, hey, I printed this thing, because there's some other issues, mostly to do with color, that I want you to be aware of. The printing process itself is pretty in-depth. We'll just say okay to that, and what you'll see here is my working area, and then my bleed out to the side. That's the main thing I wanted to point out to you from here. So while I'm working in a certain area, I have a couple of temporary documents here, I would know that this piece is actually going to cut off here. I can turn my rulers on, get some guides, say like, wow, I like the idea of bleed, but I want to start cutting off, that great point in my head. So maybe I need to scale everything down. What's also great is that you'll be working in Adobe Illustrator, and if you like this print and have opportunity to, you can make this really a huge, huge piece. 11 by 17 is the next normal step up, or you could make this, 3 feet by 3 feet, and have it professionally printed for not as much as you might think. And it would sometimes larger artwork is just unbelievably stunning. Turn off the guide here. It's a little bit. While I'm here, let's take a look at the facial feature. You've all started off with a photograph of some sort. You kind of use what the piece we did with the key before. Just drag a photo in and work on top of it to get you a proper sizes, like how, where's my nose, where's my eyes, get some good ratios here rather than drawing this from scratch. Although I'm sure some of you who are closer to fine art students may be actually able to just use your brushes and draw this from scratch in Illustrator would be fantastic. But what's great here is the pose. The person's still basically centered, but they're not just sitting in the center and looking behind you. Think about the dynamic nature of your pose. If you have opportunity to take, some cell phone pics, you're not looking at anything great. You just look as a starter kit, your photograph. And then from there, the colors here are great. There's some lights and stuff in here. You see shadows and some over, underneath the lip and some highlights across the brow. None of this stuff is overly intricate, but it does create a dimensionality, but it still has the overall look and feel of flat artwork. Doesn't not look Photoshop or photorealistic. One opportunity to work with. Most of you have gotten Adobe Creative Suite 6 or Adobe CC. Let's pop into Adobe Bridge. If for some reason you don't have this, don't worry about it. Adobe Bridge, for all practical purposes, is kind of like a little file management tool. Some of the files that you create and you look up in your regular folder structure on your PC or Mac, you can't view a preview, and it can be a pain when you start to have a lot of documents. So I use this folder. It's pretty self-explanatory using Bridge, excuse me. And this way I can browse through files and I have opportunity to see anything from the metadata. It can be very in-depth, but I'm really just looking to just give you a quick show of some opportunities here that are, some of these are in your document for your examples PDF. If you look at this piece right here, for as vivid and robust and stylized as it is, it's really a very straightforward. If you notice, what's the background? Concentric circles. We did those previously. We look at this is just lines, single lines that outline almost a straight color. This piece right here will just have a little bit of gradient mesh. Maybe you could just do some highlights over that. There's some hot points here where it's not of her lips, little bit added here of the tattoo on the shoulder, give a little bit depth. Additional visual interest and also maybe to the personality. And if you think about this, the hair, this is just one piece that has been used over and over again. So if you start looking at the examples, they're a little bit more straightforward if you break them down into component pieces. Take a look here. This was taken from the internet. I love this picture mostly for the color palette and also the harshness of the angles for the shadows. It's geometric, but something about it, maybe it's her facial expression, it's also the color, soften this up quite a bit. And if you notice, there's a different style with the lace on top of the blouse that contradicts the big harshness that's in the face there. Fantastic work. Let's take a look at this one here. Another one that's very geometric, very straightforward. You could even be so wild and crazy as to make half of this document, right? And then flip it over. This is almost identical. You could mirror this and then fix the hair to unify it. Think about it. Draw half yourself and then do the other one. There's a couple other examples. I like this a lot, mostly because of the color. They're pumped up. It shows great emotion. There's no gradients in here. There's just some lines. There's really the only areas of heavy intricacy are around the nose and also in the eyes. This picture here, it was in there. This is a little bit more of a scene. I don't know if I'd go too far this way. This is supposed to be a self-portrait, but at the same time, this does encapsulate the emotive content of the person, foregoing the grunge effect. I'm not sure if I really like that or would suggest you go that way. This says a lot about the person, and this is a very quirky, simplistic, just nice, straightforward piece of artwork. Something a little more vivid for those of you that strike it this way. Again, get your initial piece, and you have just kind of the whole melted brain thing, exposed thought processes, dichotomy in view here on a nice white background. Fantastic stuff. I will now pop over to the student self-portraits. This is done by students here in the class, and I apologize because some of these colors are washed out. They were actually photographs of the actual printed art pieces. I don't have the digital files for the students' work here. This piece I like, very straightforward, but I like the angle and the cropping of this. It's not just, a person in the middle looking straight at you. Nice and just a very cheery smile. Nothing spectacular, but there's something just right about this. If you look at this next student example here, look at this could be done with a series of just straightforward brush strokes that we looked at earlier in your video demonstrations. Some highlights in the face, not a lot of tonal changes, whatever, just some wavy lines that say, hey, lighter areas, say I'm, further away from the core structure, meaning I'm getting a little bit more light, a little bit of shadows, subtle hints of texture. Then the hat right here is just a repeating pattern, and you could even set that as a clipping path. Make a pattern with a brush or a pattern fill, and then just say, hey, I just needed to make a hat, just something that says, hey, I'm more country western. I don't see this picture and think city slicker or anything like that, if you will. So what's the initial hit? Like when I see this picture, what do I think? Here's a great one. I love this. This was from a fine artist, and she really struggled a little bit getting on, but this is very abstract. She was very consumed with lines and some of her more tangible fine artwork, and some of the things in Illustrator just really helped her out. And this is, again, just emotive. She had very curly hair, and rather than trying to make it look like hair, it just started taking up this whole piece here, and just fantastic layering. We have a great dichotomy here. This person, if you look at this is split kind of in two halves with no straight line, single photograph. This is the person left is at work, and the right hand side is out in play. So if you notice, even the choice of colors, blue for corporate. You're looking at the suit right here. I think he worked at a bank part-time. So you're looking at the type of setting, even the hair being a little more fixed and I guess more correct for him for work. We go to the right-hand side and we change the shirt, we change the color, we even have a pencil behind the ear because he's a designer and constantly drawing. Great way to express both halves of a larger personality. We have another example here that I love that's super abstract. And that what I liked about this one here is the shot at depth behind the main image here. We have the person's face, very geometric, just some swooping long hair, and then there's more hair here going behind. Lastly, we're looking at this piece here. This is more of a scene. I like it. After long discussions with the student, we decided that this was actually okay and did kind of say what she was about as opposed to straight facial features. She did a lot of work which unfortunately cannot be seen in this particular view in the horse and what have you. But I think this is pretty nice. It's just happy, got a little bit of a retro feel going on. We have some gradient starbursts, some nice clouds in the background, and some repeating patterns here. All of it very successful. Hope this helps. Let's talk about one more thing here. We'll talk about color. For those of you who have some issues starting with color or have not delved into Adobe Cooler, this is Adobe cooler.adobe.com, or you can say color.adobe.com. That is up for grabs. I'll actually delete all this stuff and just go to the home page here. You should have had from the get-go, starting this class, your Adobe IE, so you can sign in with this. You can create some patterns. You can then start off with an initial, you can sample, a hex color or RGB color. Change this here. Let's go for a triad system. And this will give me some great opportunities of colors that are well balanced and work well together. Sometimes your eye, if you're not really trained at this, is not quite as good as you think. A good designer or someone else can really tell if you haven't had a color theory class, if you're kind of just making it up as you go along. The pieces have a tendency to fight with each other and not really always work as well. Complementary colors scheme, compound color scheme. So cooler.adobe.com, good resource to maybe help you get started with the heavy emotive context of use of color. And also one of my favorites is Color Lovers, which is colorlovers.com. Let me pop back here to the home page. And there we are. And this has anything from color schemes to color patterns. This has been a great resource for me over the years. What I've actually done is I've searched for retro color schemes. Type up here in the nice search box like any good website. I came up with one good here. I think this was the one. No, I picked this one, Ocean 5. I said this will be a little. I mean, if I just look at this, this says retro. Some of these things use maybe more for inspiration to get started as opposed to the actual color scheme. I'll click on this, and then I have this area down here. That's the huge piece that I would possibly not actually need. Oh, went too far back. Oceans 5. And then by looking at this, I now have either my hex colors or my RGB values, which is comma separated, so it's red, green, and then blue. I can just drop this into Adobe Illustrator and then go straight from there and have that exact color scheme in 2 minutes, and then hopefully tweak it to my own personal taste and what's working in your project from there. So hopefully this adds some insight into what I'm looking for, all the possibilities that are out there for you in your self-portrait project, and have at it. And don't forget, lots of iterations, lots of trial and error, and all that good stuff. Enjoy.